everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Seeking Truth podcast. We are continuing on this week with this idea of if God is real, how come I can't hear him and how come I can't see him? And we've got today a special guest. We've got Bec Williams here, who is going to be going into a little bit of her testimony and her journey of kind of asking herself this question and how God revealed herself to her in the process. So welcome, Bec.
Thank you. Hey, Emma.
Hi. Why don't you tell the listeners like a fun fact about yourself?
Oh, gosh. A fun fact about me. I know how to sew.
That is a fun fact.
Yeah. So that's just a random crafty thing about me. And I love the colour purple.
I love that. Actually, Bec has a online store, guys, if you want to go check her out, called Lavender Boutique. She makes these really cute scrunchies and you make lots of things like dog ornaments and do you make dog outfits as well?
Yeah, like little pet bandanas and baby stuff and just little things.
It's very cute. Go check it out. Definitely give her a follow on Instagram. Well, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us here today. I think it's really lovely hearing not just one person talk about it. So, if people are questioning, oh, that's great, Emma, what you shared last week, but you're just one person. So it's really great having other people come on and kind of share their story as well, because God works in different ways for everyone, and how he spoke to me is different to how he speaks to other people. So why don't we flash back in time to pre-Christian Beck and kind of paint us a picture of what life was like for you prior to your kind of journey with God starting.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in a non-Christian single-parent household, so I didn't really have those Christian values instilled in me growing up. And my parents divorced when I was young, and there was a lot of, abuse and manipulation and stuff that we all kind of went through as, a part of that broken family dynamic. And so I grew up knowing about Christianity. My grandmother is a very, very solid woman of God. And, I was friends with a pastor's daughter in primary school. So I knew about God, but I was never, in it. And I think that kind of led to me making some really bad choices growing up when it came to, finances and relationships and valuing myself and having a purpose. And it was all just a bit of a mess, pretty much. But yeah, I started to, really have that crisis of faith in my early 20s. I was living out of home in the city, going to uni, paying ridiculous amounts of rent for a 7-person share house. And I was placing a lot of importance on what I looked like and, the clothes I wore and the people I hung out with and, going out and partying and, all of the kind of worldly things that are important to you if you don't have any other kind of higher purpose. So I was kind of in a bit of a funk, I think. I was very just content with the way my life was, whether it was good or bad. It was just, it is what it is. I was just a bit miserable, to be honest.
Yeah. And what was your perspective on God in that time? What were thoughts that you were having about religion and God in general?
Yeah, I had some pretty sour tastes in my mouth about Christianity after some not so great experiences. I remember in high school being told by a scripture teacher that I was going to hell because my parents were divorced.
Wow.
So that kind of really set the foundation for just that little bit of bitterness, but just kind of if that's what you're about, I don't want to be about that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it's a shame that is unfortunately a lot of people's experiences of of religion and Christianity, where it's painted as this picture of God being this super high judge that just wants everyone to go to hell, and it's only a select few that go to heaven. And I think it's really sad that that's been how he's been portrayed, because when you know him, you know he's the complete opposite. He's a God that wants everyone to come to heaven and doesn't want anyone to go to hell. So yeah, it's just sad that he's been warped in that way, and people have misportrayed him, I guess. Yeah
definitely. And it was really easy for me to kind of just prescribe to the worldview, because I didn't have that instilled in me. You know, I didn't grow up in church and walk away kind of thing. So it was just the way it had always been for me. And I was just kind of content with just being miserable and just letting things be the way they were.
Yeah. Was there any part of you that kind of blamed God? Like, if there was a God, like, why is this all happening, or anything like that?
I think that kind of came later, like a little bit later, when I sort of reached a bit of a tipping point. But prior to that, I didn't blame God, because I didn't really believe that he was there. And if he was there, it was kind of like I had this really warped sense of, well, if I don't follow God, then he doesn't care about me. So it doesn't matter kind of thing, which is entirely untrue. But yeah, just the things that I was told growing up about Christianity and about religion really made me think about that in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us about like this tipping point, and kind of how that started your journey towards God.
Yeah. So it was about 5 years ago now. I went through something really traumatic and really devastating. And my whole life was kind of just flipped on its head, where I was like no longer just content with a subpar or mediocre life. And I'd gone through something that it made me angry, you know, and it made me really confused about just, you know, why things happen in a certain way. I struggled mentally after that too. So I ended up being diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. And yeah, I was just at that point where I was like, why? You know, like it's such a loaded question. Like, why did I have to go through this? Why do bad things happen? Why is life just like this, you know? And it got to the point where I was just really frustrated that there was no person to blame. Like, there was no higher power that I could put this on. And yeah, I think I got really bitter about life in general, and I got into a really deep pit of despair where I didn't really care if I woke up in the morning anymore, you know, and it made things really hard for my family and my friends as well, because they saw me suffering, but they didn't know how to help. But yeah, I went and got some help, and I started to feel happiness again. And you know, it's one of those moments where I reflect and I can see God littered throughout my story, even before I started questioning whether he was real. Because, you know, it was around that time that I'd gotten a job I applied for months earlier. And that's the job where, you know, I met who's now my husband, Diddy. And that's where I kind of think that God started to really use other people to bring me closer to him.
Yeah, wow. So when did you notice for yourself starting to wonder, is there actually a God? Is there actually someone more than this?
Yeah, it was definitely through becoming friends with Diddy. You know, I learned that he was a Christian and I wasn't. And it was that moment of like, oh, okay, I know a Christian now. And you know, I was just surprised because he didn't look or, you know, seem like the Christian I had painted in my head after all my bad experiences. And that's when I realized I wasn't actually quite sure what I believed. You know, Diddy would always talk about this God that redeemed him and saved him and loved him and wanted all these amazing things for him. And I was kind of like, how can that God be real when all this awful stuff is happening in the world? Like it was really that moment where I was like, I just got really confused about whether I thought God was real, because I didn't see it, but Diddy did, and his friends that I met did.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, am I the one that's kind of wrong here?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then did you kind of start asking him more questions, or he was just sharing with you? And how did that kind of develop a bit more?
Yeah. So he invited me to church a few times, and I would always make an excuse to not go.
Yeah.
I think quite honestly out of fear. But it kind of got to a point where one day he was talking about God, and I just I didn't snap, but I was just like, how can you believe in a God that makes all this bad stuff happen? He doesn't, like, he just lets it all happen. He's this angry man in the sky. And Diddy was like, well, actually, I don't know who you're talking about, but my God is not like that. My God is loving and kind. And I think that conversation became another tipping point where I was like, so how do I work this out? Because I want to know, I need to know, because if God's real, I have some questions for him, but I just don't know if he's real because I've never seen him. I've never heard him, what do I have to do to, please him and make him show himself? And Diddy just really plainly put it, just pray. Just if you want God to reveal himself to you, you ask him, God, if you're real, I don't know what I believe, but if you're real, please reveal yourself to me.
Yeah.
And, that was kind of like, it was like then you'll know the truth. Like, so that's what I did. I started to pray. It was a really funny story. My first prayer was really awkward and like really like massive stream of consciousness because I didn't really know what I was doing. And I remember it like it was my prayer this morning, like I was in the shower because I was like, I wanted some privacy. And I was like, how do I start this? I was like, dear Lord, dear God, hi God. Like I was like, how do I do this? What? It's like, it's Rebecca like here. Well, you probably know that already if you're real and you see everything. Like it was just like, what am I doing here? But like, should I be praying in the shower? Is that appropriate? But I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. And, it was just after that first monologue of a prayer, it was a really simple prayer, like once or twice a day of, I need to know if you're real. If you are, please reveal yourself to me. And that was like, every day, sometimes twice a day. And after a week, it was just like radio silence,
Nothing's happening. What's happening?
Yeah, exactly. And it was like, is he like on holidays? Did he like, is he leaving me on red? Like he doesn't care? Like what's happening? And I was getting really antsy about it. It's like, Diddy, it's not working. I'm ready for this answer. Like I don't hear God, but I'm ready to know if he's real. So does this mean he's not real for me, but he's real for you? And it was just like, Diddy was like, well, you think you're ready, but only God knows when you are ready. Ooh. And it's not about your timeline, it's about God's timeline.
Wow.
Yeah. It was very, like be patient, young grasshopper kind of stuff. Like, but it was just such a foreign concept to me. Like I didn't have to worry about anyone else's timeline as someone who didn't believe in God because it was all about me. Right? So it was just this really foreign concept of, but I'm ready, but maybe I'm not actually ready.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And so then, like, what happened after that? After, you prayed for a week and nothing's happened and now I'm salty, God, what's happening?
Yeah, I was so salty. I didn't give up. Like I kept going and I was pressing on, and it was, another week of praying and not hearing him. And like on reflection, I can see how badly I wanted it to be real. Like if I didn't, it would have just been like, oh, well, it's been a week, nothing's happening, whatever, there's my answer. But, I can see I so desperately wanted there to be something more. So I kept going for that answer. And yeah, so Diddy invited me to church again after, about 2 weeks of nothing. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll come, like maybe I'll hear God there. And yeah, I walked into the church that Sunday and I was really nervous, and I was like really scared, and I was like, they're gonna know, like, like this is
not a Christian, like
neon banner above my head.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sat down and the pastor kind of got up on the platform, and he was like, doing the whole, if it's your first time here, we're so glad you're here. And, first time to church, I didn't know that was a thing, right? And I was like, oh, has he made a big deal about this? Has Diddy told people I'm coming? Like, what is this about? Like so self-centered in my thinking, like on reflection. But then he said, we're starting a new series today. It's called Listen, and it's all about how to hear the voice of God.
No way.
Immediately.
Love that.
Yeah, you mentioned this last week in your podcast. You felt this like big overwhelm, like this pressure in your chest, and my eyes welled up, and, now I know that that's Holy Spirit, right? But I just felt this intense feeling, and I was like, did he know I was coming today? Is that why he's doing this? Like, and he continued and he said, like, I need you to know, if you're struggling to hear God right now, or you feel like God's maybe ignoring you, he isn't. He loves you and he knows you.
Wow.
And all right, let's go. Let's get into it. And that was it. I knew God was real.
Wow.
He revealed himself to me, through someone, and that person did not even know what he had done, what he had contributed towards, until, I told him later. But I was expecting this big, moment, like this big theatrical, clouds parting, Morgan Freeman voice, like a hand coming out of the clouds, like my child, like And I didn't get that. And I think that's like, and you've touched on this last week as well, like when we expect something like that, we miss all those little things. And, like there were so many little things when I look back on my journey that it was so clearly God now. Like I can see with, clarity that it was God, but I just overlooked it because it was just a coincidence, or, oh, that's just lucky, you know. But yeah, that same night I asked Diddy, can I come back to church with you next week?
No way.
And the next day I asked, like, how do I buy a Bible? Like, is there a Bible store? How do you get a Bible? So I went and got a Bible, and I read the entire Gospel of Mark like 3 times over that week. And then, 3 weeks later, there was an altar call, and I responded, and, I just felt this voice say, what are you waiting for? Like, you have everything you need to know right now.
Yeah.
You don't have all the answers, but you know enough. So what are you waiting for? And that was it. Here we are 4.5 years later.
I love that. Go back to you talking about you felt a voice. What did that sound like? Because I think people expect when they hear God speak that it's like an external voice. Like, what does it feel like for you when you hear God speak to you?
Yeah. So I think I kind of assumed it would be like that too. But for me personally, and obviously acknowledging that, it's not the same for everyone. But for me personally, it's just a whisper in my head. It's like a thought of my own, but I know it's not my own thought. It's a bit hard to explain, but it's I know that I'm not thinking that thought. It's been put in there.
Yeah.
And I think that's how God's fairly consistently spoken to me throughout my walk with him.
Yeah.
But God reveals himself in so many ways, through
Definitely.
the perfect scripture at the perfect moment, or like you said last week, through someone saying the exact words that you need to hear, but they have no idea what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So it's beautiful, but it's not always this big theatrical moment, because God's an intimate God. Like he wants to speak to us individually.
That's right. Yeah. And even like our experience of Holy Spirit, like you mentioned, for you, it's like a pressure in your chest and like you feel like your eyes well up. For me, it's like more like a tingly feeling. So I think, again, everyone feels it differently. And if we have one idea of what it's going to look like, we miss how God's trying to uniquely communicate with us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I agree.
So good. Okay. So you're going to church and you're like, responded to the altar call. Yes, I'm living my life for Jesus now. Did you change overnight? What happened?
I think a lot of things made sense that didn't previously make sense. And I think when I think back to prior to becoming a Christian, where I was just happy living that life with whatever it is, like I was content with just misery basically, or like not feeling whole. It was like an overnight or immediate shift of I feel whole now, like something in me feels complete. In terms of, my lifestyle and stuff like that, it was difficult because I was not surrounded by Christian people. My best friends are not Christians, or some of them are not Christians. And so, my family's not Christian. Telling them was a massive deal to me because I was really scared that they would, shun me or, cast me out or judge me. And so I think little by little, the more I learned about God and the more I read about, the sacrifice on the cross and all the beautiful letters of Paul and everything that kind of just forms the basis of Christianity today, I started to naturally, like as a reflex, live my life for Jesus. But, it doesn't mean that it's easy, and it doesn't make your life easy. It's not like, it's a guarantee that things are not going to be hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely, some things were very overnight, and other things, we're all humans of the flesh, we're all going to fall short all the time. So yeah, it wasn't like I became this pure, blameless, like saint. But I definitely knew now that I needed to try to aspire to be like Jesus.
Yeah, definitely. And what's that journey look like for you, trying to become more Christ-like, and walking towards that and away from the way you used to live your life?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like an everyday surrender. And I think whether you've been a Christian for 4 years or 40 years, or 4 minutes, it's always going to be about surrendering your flesh, and constantly asking for forgiveness and constantly giving things to God. Looking back on my journey, I can see that God was there the whole time, like everything that I put down to a coincidence was God. And I think that teamed with, the struggles that I had endured without God, I just knew there was no other way but forward and for Jesus. So yeah, I think it's challenging when you have close people that don't know Jesus, because as Christians, we know what their eternity looks like. And so it's like this very mission-minded, like plant seeds wherever you can, like use any opportunity to share the good news. I think that's what has really garnered my walk from the beginning.
Yeah, I love that. I had a question. Now my brain's forgotten it. Oh, okay. Well, what would you like to say, like, for people? I've known some people who are like, yes, I believe in God, and, you know, I would call myself a Christian, but they're having trouble with kind of like walking that out in their life. Or, you know, they might read their Bible, but they're having trouble kind of applying that to their life because they're not hearing from God, or they can't recognize when God's hearing from them. Like, did you experience any of that yourself? And how did you kind of walk through that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely times in my walk where I've kind of felt like, where are you, God? You know, why is this happening? Like I kind of said earlier, it's not a guarantee that life will be perfect or easy when we become a Christian. We're not signing up for any shortcuts,
Yeah.
you know, and it's a roller coaster and it's not linear. And you know, it's this thing of doubt, you know, like if something doesn't happen for us, there's always this little seed of doubt in the back of our mind that's like, well, why didn't that happen?
Yeah.
And you know, that's not exclusive to us as, you know, people in 2022. It's, you know, the disciples doubted. They were shocked and confused and scared and surprised by Jesus all the time.
Yeah.
And they were like living with him. So it's okay, I think, would be my first point. It's okay to have those doubts, but it's not okay to let that doubt fester into anything more.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would definitely, go back to that point of it's an everyday surrender. Like if you're struggling, or if you're questioning things, ask God for help. You know, he's always there. He's, like you said last week, an everyday God. And he's always going to help us. It may not be in the way we expect, though. So, you know, we need to be ready for that as well. But yeah, and community as well. Community is so important to kind of walk with when you're struggling or doubting or confused.
Definitely. Yeah. I find that something that when I'm struggling and doubting, and it happens to all of us, regardless of, like you said, how long we've been a Christian, like having that community and having someone that you trust enough to be like, help, I'm struggling with this. And then you just know they're going to speak life into you and remind you of like, remember when God's done this for you, and remember that he said this about you. And just because you're feeling this way now doesn't mean that's like the truth. And that doesn't mean that this is your forever place. You know, it's so helpful and so important to have community. And it's so hard at the moment because a lot of places are still online, or church like communities have really shrunk with COVID, and, you know, people have just stopped going to church. And I think it just shows the importance of, if you're not well connected into a church, then it's so easy to fall away because those doubts creep in and you have nothing to kind of combat that. And the Bible, you're right. You go.
No, I totally agree with you. Like it's such a challenge.
Yeah. And the Bible talks about how we have to guard ourselves and put on the armor of God, because like these thoughts will try and pull us away from God. That's the devil's whole agenda is, you know, he wants people to stop believing in God and to doubt God, because then he wins, and we're going to constantly get attacked, even if we've been Christians for a long time, or even if we're a brand new Christian. And we really have to kind of protect ourselves against that doubt that comes in.
Yeah, 100%. And the enemy gets quite scared when things are going well for us in our walk, when we are relying on God and when we are trusting God and when we are giving everything to him. And that's when, you know, he kind of goes into panic mode and the enemy's like, oh, I've got to shake something up here because he's trusting God way too much. And I think that's where a lot of struggles do come from, you know, and then you've got to kind of combat it in a way where you're honoring your struggle and the pain that you may be feeling, but you're also surrendering it to God to kind of let him do the work in it as well.
Yeah. I love that. You mentioned as well, like, about this idea of God's time and not our time, and that we may feel we're ready for something and God knows whether we're not actually ready. How do you kind of look on that that week where you were pursuing him and you were praying every day and he didn't reveal himself in the way you were expecting. Now that you've got some more knowledge of God and his character, how do you kind of look back on that and view that now?
I still apply that, like that truth to my walk today.
Yeah.
Like I think when we're living in a world where it's all about us and it's very self-centered and, we need to be at the front of everything, it's sometimes easy to let God's plan slip by the wayside. But we need to always be bringing ourselves back to that.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes when we're ready, God knows we're ready too, and it works out and timing is perfect. But a lot of the time it's not. And I guess one example of, becoming a Christian and still having that thought of my time, but God's time, I'm now married to Diddy and we're wanting to start a family and we're kind of being told by God, just not yet, not yet. And it's kind of this thing of, but I'm ready. Like, I want this. I'm ready for this. I can handle this. But God's obviously in the background thinking, you think you're ready, but I know you're not just yet. I know there's something else I need to teach you or something else you need to go through or, before I can give that to you. And even then it may not look the way we think it's going to look when we get it. So it's just that everyday surrender of, okay, like I need to trust you, God, because I think I'm ready, but I'm not. And whether I agree with you or whether I am willing to accept that, that's the way it is. And I just need to trust and be faithful and know that you only want good things for me.
Yeah, definitely. And that can hopefully be an encouragement to people who are struggling in that idea of like, is God real, and exploring, and but why hasn't everything in my life aligned yet? And yeah, sometimes it is a timing thing. And sometimes you learn so much through that hard slog, and you build your character and you build your strength up and you learn how to trust deeply in God, because things are out of your control. And you can't learn that unless you're in a position where you are out of control, like that you're not in control. If we could control it, then we wouldn't learn anything, because we would just keep changing it until it was the way we wanted,
Yeah, exactly. I guess also if you feel like you're in control of everything, you don't need God. You don't need to rely on a God to deliver you from things or save you from things or, protect you or build you up. So I think, there's definitely this misconception that, giving your life to God grants you access to a struggle-free life. And that's totally not the case, it's not easy, but we're doing it for, something other than ourselves.
Yeah, so good. Just our final question before we head off today. What's one final thing that you'd like to say to anyone listening today that is in the stage that you were in of, questioning if God's real, haven't yet gone to church, haven't yet had any experience with God? What's a final thing you'd like to say to encourage them?
Oh gosh, excellent question. I think for me it's kind of twofold. I think firstly, if you're in that place where you're confused or not sure what you're thinking or believing, press on and don't give up. It's kind of like when you flip a coin to figure out what you want to eat for dinner, and heads is pizza and tails is Chinese, and it lands on tails, but you realize in that moment you really wanted pizza. Like if you're not getting an answer, but you still feel like you need that answer, don't give up, keep going. And secondly, I think it's so important to ask for help, not just from God, but from other people, because God uses other people to bring healing and peace and wisdom into our lives. And for me, I truly believe that God used Diddy to bring me closer to him.
Yeah.
And it may be a church community, it may be a friend or a colleague, or, you know, a random person you cross paths with one day that, you know, you have no idea the impact they're going to have on your life. But yeah, ask for help, because God's people are going to help you. We want to see you in heaven.
Yeah. Love that. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. Like, I gained a lot from listening to you, and I'm sure the people who are listening to this podcast right now have gained a lot as well. So thank you so much. I'll put her Lavender Boutique thing in the description box if you want to go check her out and support local businesses. But thanks so much again. And God bless everyone that's listening to this. And I hope that this has inspired you to don't give up and keep seeking God and think out of the box. Don't expect that he's going to show up in the way that you're expecting, and look for those little coincidences across your life.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma. What a privilege.
You're so welcome. I loved having you on here. So that's it for today's episode, guys. And make sure you check out next week's episode on Seeking Truth Podcast.